William stood at the bottom of the old wooden staircase in his grandmother's house and felt that familiar pull of curiosity. Every time he visited Grandma Rose with his wife Kate, his eyes would drift toward the upstairs hallway where that mysterious door waited. The door was different from all the others in the house. While every other door was painted white and had glass handles, this one was made of dark oak wood with a brass handle that had turned green with age. Rose had lived in this Victorian house for over 50 years. She had moved here as a young bride with William's grandfather back in 1970. The house had been their dream home then, with its high ceilings, large windows, and beautiful garden that stretched toward the old oak trees at the back of the property. William remembered visiting as a child and running through those same rooms, but even then that door had been locked. Even then, his grandmother had worn that brass key on a faded blue ribbon around her neck. Kate was in the kitchen helping Rose prepare lunch when William decided to climb the stairs. His footsteps creaked on the old wooden steps as he made his way up. The house smelled like lavender and old books, the same comforting scents he remembered from his childhood visits. At the top of the stairs, he turned left and walked down the narrow hallway. Family photos lined the walls, showing decades of birthdays, holidays, and celebrations. But when he reached the end of the hallway, there it was again. The locked door. William had asked about it many times over the years. When he was 10 years old, he had pointed at the door and asked Rose what was inside. She had quickly taken his hand and led him away, telling him it was just storage space for old things that nobody needed anymore. When he was 16 and helping his grandfather fix the roof, he had mentioned the door again. His grandfather had gone quiet for a moment, then changed the subject to baseball. Even as an adult, whenever William brought up the mysterious room, Rose would find something else to talk about. The brass key caught the afternoon sunlight streaming through the hallway window. William could see it clearly from where he stood. The ribbon looked worn and soft, as if Rose touched it often. He wondered how many times she had stood in this exact spot holding that key, perhaps thinking about opening the door. He wondered, what could be so important that she kept it locked away for all these years? From downstairs, he could hear Kate and Rose laughing about something in the kitchen. Kate had a way of making Rose smile that William admired. His wife had grown up without grandparents, so she treasured every moment with Rose. She would spend hours listening to Rose's stories about the old days, about how different the neighborhood used to be, about the garden and the flowers she planted each spring. But Kate had also noticed the locked door, and she was just as curious as William. William remembered the first time he had brought Kate to meet Rose 3 years ago. They had been dating for 6 months, and William was nervous about the introduction. Rose could be particular about the people in William's life, and he wanted her approval. But Kate and Rose had connected immediately. They spent the afternoon in the garden, with Rose teaching Kate about the different types of roses and how to care for them. Later, when they were having tea, Kate had excused herself to use the bathroom upstairs. When Kate came back down, she had a strange look on her face. Later, when they were driving home, she asked William about the locked door. She said she had felt drawn to it, almost like it was calling to her. She had stood in front of it for several minutes, wondering what was inside. William had explained that it had been locked for as long as he could remember. But he could see that Kate was not satisfied with that answer. Over the following months, as their visits to Rose became more regular, both William and Kate began to notice small things about the locked door. Sometimes Rose would go upstairs for long periods, and they would hear her footsteps stop at the end of the hallway. Sometimes they would catch her standing in front of the door, her hand resting on the wood, looking lost in thought. When she noticed them watching, she would quickly move away and pretend she had been doing something else. Kate had mentioned too, William, that she sometimes saw Rose crying after these quiet moments by the door. Rose would come downstairs with red eyes and a sad expression, but if they asked if she was all right, she would smile and say she was just tired. William knew his grandmother well enough to know that she was not telling the truth. But he also knew that pushing her to talk about something she did not want to discuss would only make her more upset. The mystery of the locked door had become a constant presence in their visits. It was like a puzzle that neither William nor Kate could solve. They would spend their drive home discussing theories about what might be inside. Kate thought it might be photographs or letters from Williams. grandfather who had passed away 15 years ago. William wondered if it might be documents or legal papers that Rose wanted to keep private. They both agreed that whatever was behind that door was deeply personal and important to Rose. Standing in the hallway now, William felt the weight of all those unanswered questions. He could hear Rose's voice drifting up from the kitchen, telling Kate about the new flowers she wanted to plant in the spring. Rose was 78 years old, and although she was still healthy and active, Rose knew that she would not be around forever. He worried that whatever secrets that room held might die with her, and that they would never understand why she had kept it locked away for so many years. The afternoon sun was beginning to fade, casting long shadows down the hallway. William took one last look at the brass key hanging on its ribbon, then turned and walked back toward the stairs. He could smell something delicious cooking in the kitchen, and he knew that Kate and Rose would be expecting him to join them soon. But as he walked away, he could not shake the feeling that the locked door was keeping something important from them. Something that Rose wanted to share, but could not bring herself to reveal. Kate wiped her hands on the kitchen towel and glanced toward the staircase where William had disappeared a few minutes earlier. She knew exactly where he had gone. It's the same place he always went when they visited Rose. That locked door at the end of the upstairs hallway called to him just like it called to her. There was something about that door that neither of them could ignore, something that made them both feel like they were missing an important piece of Rose's story. Rose was standing at the kitchen counter, cutting vegetables for their lunch. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she hummed softly as she worked. At 78 years old, Rose still moved with grace and purpose. Her hands were steady as she sliced tomatoes, and her eyes were bright behind her reading glasses. But Kate had learned to read the subtle signs that showed when Rose was thinking about something that made her sad. The way Rose's shoulders tensed slightly when someone mentioned the upstairs rooms. The way her fingers would unconsciously reach for the brass key that hung around her neck. The way her humming would stop mid-song when she heard footsteps in the hallway above. Kate had been watching these small signals for 3 years now. Ever since she first met Rose and felt that strange pull toward the mysterious door, Kate had grown up in a small apartment with just her mother. They'd moved frequently when Kate was young, never staying in one place long enough to collect many belongings or create lasting memories in any particular space. When she met William and started visiting Rose's house, she was amazed by how every room told a story. Every photograph had a memory attached to it. Every piece of furniture had been chosen with care and love. But that locked door seemed to hold the most important story of all, and it was the one story Rose refused to tell. During Kate's second visit to the house, she had offered to help Rose with the weekly cleaning. Rose had accepted gratefully, and they had spent the morning dusting furniture and washing windows. When they reached the upstairs rooms, Rose had given Kate clean sheets for the guest bedrooms and towels for the bathroom. But when they walked past the locked door, Rose had stopped talking entirely. Kate had watched as Rose's hand moved instinctively to the key around her neck, her fingers closing around it protectively. That day, Kate had asked Rose directly about the room. She had tried to keep her voice casual and friendly, not wanting to seem pushy or nosy. Rose had looked at her for a long moment, and Kate had seen something flicker in her eyes. Pain, maybe, or fear. Rose had simply said that some rooms were better left undisturbed, that the past should sometimes stay in the past. Then she had quickly moved away and started talking about what they should make for dinner, but Kate had noticed that Rose's hands were shaking slightly as she folded the towels. She had noticed the tears that Rose tried to hide by turning toward the window, and she had noticed that Rose avoided walking past that door for the rest of the day, taking the long way around through the main hallway instead of using the shorter path that would take her past the locked room over the months that followed. Kate began to pay closer attention to Rose's behavior around the mysterious door. She noticed that Rose would sometimes go upstairs in the evening after dinner, and Kate would hear her footsteps stop at the end of the hallway. The house would become very quiet, and Kate would wonder what Rose was doing up there. Sometimes these quiet moments would last for 10 or 15 minutes. When Rose came back downstairs, her eyes would be red, and she would seem lost in thought. Kate had tried different approaches to learn more about the locked room. She had asked William's mother about it, but she said she had always wondered about it too, and had never gotten a straight answer from Rose. She had looked for old photographs that might show what the room had been used for, but all the family pictures seemed to focus on other parts of the house. She had even tried to research the history of the house itself, thinking that might give her some clues. But she had not found anything helpful. The mystery had become more than just curiosity for Kate. She genuinely cared about Roseanne could see that whatever was behind that door caused her pain. Kate wanted to help, but she did not know how. She wanted to understand what made Rose so sad, but she did not want to push too hard and risk damaging their relationship. Rose had become like the grandmother Kate had never had. Their friendship meant everything to her. Sometimes Kate would catch Rose staring at the key around her neck, turning it over in her fingers like a worry stone. Sometimes she would find Rose sitting in the living room, looking up toward the ceiling as if she could see through the floor to the room above. Kate began to understand that Rose was carrying a heavy burden, something that she had been carrying alone for many years, William had told Kate that his grandfather had died 15 years ago, but the door had been locked long before that. Remembered it being locked when he was a child in the 1990s? That meant Rose had been keeping this secret for at least 30 years, maybe longer. Kate could not imagine carrying such a heavy secret for so long. She wondered what could be so painful that Rose felt she could not share it with anyone, not even her own grandson. During their most recent visit, Kate had been helping Rose plant new flowers in the garden when Rose had suddenly stopped working and looked up at the house. Kate had followed her gaze and seen that Rose was staring at the upstairs window that belonged to the locked room. Rose had stood there for several minutes, her hands covered in soil, tears running down her cheeks. When Kate had gently asked if she was all right, Rose had wiped her face and said she was just remembering old times now. As Kate stood in the kitchen watching Rose prepare their meal, she felt that familiar ache of wanting to help but not knowing how. She could hear William's footsteps above them. He's probably standing in front of that door again, probably feeling just as frustrated and concerned as she did. Kate wished there was a way to let Rose know that she and William were ready to listen, ready to help carry whatever burden she had been carrying alone for so many years. The phone rang at 11:30 on a Tuesday night in October. William was already in bed, reading a book while Kate brushed her teeth in the bathroom. The sharp sound of the telephone cut through the quiet of their small apartment, and William felt his stomach drop. Late-night phone calls were never good news, especially when you had elderly family members. He reached across the nightstand and picked up the receiver, his heart already racing. The voice on the other end belonged to Mrs. Patterson, Rose's next-door neighbor. She sounded upset and worried as she explained what had happened. She had been looking out her kitchen window that evening when she noticed that Rose's garden lights were still on well after dark. Rose always turned those lights off before sunset, Mrs. Patterson said. She was very particular about her routine. When Mrs. Patterson looked more carefully, she could see a dark shape lying among the rose bushes near the back of the garden. Mrs. Patterson had immediately called the police and then hurried over to Rose's house. She found Rose unconscious on the ground next to her favorite rose bush, the one with the deep red flowers that she had planted in memory of William's grandfather. Rose was lying very still, and at first Mrs. Patterson was afraid that she might be dead. But when the ambulance arrived, the paramedics found that Rose was breathing, though her pulse was weak and irregular. William listened to all of this, while Kate came out of the bathroom and sat on the edge of the bed, watching his face. With growing concern, when Mrs. Patterson finished explaining what had happened, she told William that Rose had been taken to St. Mary's Hospital downtown. The doctors were running tests, but they had told Mrs. Patterson that Rose's condition was serious. He would know more in the morning, but William should come to the hospital as soon as possible. After William hung up the phone, he and Kate sat in shocked silence for a moment. Rose had seemed perfectly healthy during their visit just 3 days earlier. She had been working in her garden, as she did every day when the weather was good. She had made them lunch and told them stories about the neighborhood and the changes she had seen over the years. There had been no sign that anything was wrong, no indication that she was feeling unwell or having any health problems. Kate quickly got dressed while William called his boss to explain that he would not be coming to work the next day. They threw some clothes into a bag, not knowing how long they might need to stay near the hospital. The drive to St. Mary's took 45 minutes, and neither of them spoke much during the trip. William gripped the steering wheel tightly and tried not to think about losing Rose. She was the last connection he had to his grandfather and to so many family memories. The thought of a world without Rose in it seemed impossible to accept. The hospital was quiet when they arrived. The emergency room nurse directed them to the third floor, where Rose had been moved to the intensive care unit.
How the hallway smelled.
Like disinfectant and floor wax, and the fluorescent lights made everything look harsh and unnatural. William had always hated hospitals. It reminded him of the weeks he had spent visiting his grandfather before he died. Sitting in uncomfortable chairs and watching machines monitor every breath and heartbeat, Dr. Martinez met them at the nurses' station and explained Rose's condition in gentle but serious terms. Rose had suffered a major stroke while she was working in her garden. The stroke had affected the left side of her brain, which controlled speech and movement on the right side of her body. She was stable for now, but the next 24 to 48 hours would be critical. If she survived, there was a significant chance that she would have permanent damage that could affect her ability to speak, walk, or care for herself. William felt the floor seem to shift beneath his feet as he processed this information. Kate took his arm and steadied him, her own face pale with shock. Dr. Martinez continued to explain the various tests they were running and the treatments they were trying. But William found it hard to concentrate on the medical details. He could think about was Rose lying unconscious in that hospital bed, fighting for her life. When they were finally allowed to see Rose, William was not prepared for how small and fragile she looked. She had always seemed so strong and capable, even at 78 years old. But now she lay motionless under white hospital sheets, connected to machines that beeped and hummed around her bed. Her silver hair was spread across the pillow, and her face was pale and peaceful. If not for the steady rise and fall of her chest, she might have looked like she was already gone. Kate pulled 2 chairs close to Rose's bed. They sat down to begin what they knew would be a long wait. William reached out and gently took Rose's hand in his. Her skin felt cold and papery, so different from the warm, strong hands that had held his when he was a child. He found himself thinking about all the times Rose had comforted him when he was young. All the scraped knees she had bandaged, and all the hurt feelings she had soothed with cookies and kind words. As the hours passed, William and Kate took turns holding Rose's hand and talking to her quietly. The nurses had said that sometimes patients in comas could hear voices, and that familiar sounds might help with recovery. William told Rose about his job and about the apartment he and Kate were fixing up. Kate talked about the flowers in their small garden and how she had been practicing the techniques Rose had taught her. But mostly, they just sat in silence, watching Rose's face for any sign of improvement, listening to the steady rhythm of the machines that were keeping her alive. William found himself thinking about all the conversations they had never finished, all the family stories Rose had never told them, and especially about that locked door and whatever secrets it held. He realized that if Rose died, those secrets might die with her, and he would never understand what had been so important to her that she had kept it hidden for all these years. 3 weeks had passed since Rose's stroke, and the doctors were not hopeful about her recovery. She remained unconscious most of the time, though occasionally her eyes would flutter open for a few minutes before closing again. The machines around her bed continued their steady beeping, but Rose showed no signs of recognizing William or Kate when they spoke to her. Dr. Martinez had explained that even if Rose did wake up, she would likely need months of rehabilitation and might never be able to live independently again. William had been staying at Rose's house since the stroke happened, driving to the hospital every morning and returning each evening to water the plants and collect the mail. Kate joined him on weekends, and whenever she could get time off from her job, the house felt different without Rose in it. It was too quiet, too still. The familiar sounds of Rose's daily routines were missing. No humming from the kitchen, no footsteps on the stairs. No gentle voice calling to the birds that visited her garden feeders each morning on a gray Saturday morning in November. William and Kate decided that they needed to start going through Rose's belongings. It was a task that neither of them wanted to face, but Rose's medical bills were mounting, and they needed to understand her financial situation. They also knew that if Rose did not recover, They would eventually need to make decisions about the house and everything in it. The thought of sorting through a lifetime of memories felt overwhelming. They could not put it off any longer. They started in Rose's bedroom, working together to go through her dresser drawers and closet. Kate carefully folded Rose's clothes and placed them in boxes while William sorted through papers and documents he found in the bedside table. Most of the papers were routine household bills and bank statements, but William also found letters that Rose had written but never sent, birthday cards she had saved from years past, and a small address book filled with the names and phone numbers of friends and relatives. As William opened the bottom drawer of Rose's dresser, he found something that made him stop and call Kate over. Tucked beneath a stack of old photographs was a small wooden box that neither of them had seen before. The box was made of dark cherry wood and had a simple brass latch. When William opened it, they found several items that seemed to tell a story they had never heard before. Inside the box were more photographs, but these were different from the family pictures they had seen throughout the house. These photographs showed Rose and William's grandfather as a much younger couple, and with them was a little girl with curly blonde hair and bright blue eyes. The child appeared to be around 5 or 6 years old in most of the pictures. She was playing in Rose's garden, sitting at the kitchen table and laughing on the front porch swing. In every photograph, Rose and William's grandfather looked at the little girl with expressions of pure love and joy. Kate picked up one of the photographs and studied it carefully. The little girl was wearing a pink dress and holding a doll, and she was smiling directly at the camera. There was something about her face that seemed familiar, though Kate could not place where she might have seen the child before. William looked through the other photographs, finding images of birthday parties, Christmas mornings, and quiet family moments that seemed to span several years. At the bottom of the box, underneath all the photographs, William found a small envelope with his name written on it in Rose's careful handwriting. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. The letter was short, but every word seemed to carry enormous weight. Rose had written that she had always planned to tell William about Sarah when the time was right, that the years had passed too quickly and the pain had remained. It was too sharp for her to find the right words. The letter explained that Sarah had been Rose and William's grandfather's daughter, William's aunt, though he had never known she existed. Sarah had lived with them in the house for 7 wonderful years, filling their days with laughter and love. But when Sarah was 7 years old, she had become sick with a rare illness that the doctors could not cure. Despite every treatment and every prayer, Sarah had died in the spring of 1978, breaking Rose's heart in a way that had never fully healed. William read the letter twice before he could fully understand what it meant. He had an aunt named Sarah who had died before he was born. His grandparents had lost a child, had carried that grief for decades, and had never spoken of it to anyone in the family. The locked door upstairs suddenly made perfect sense. It was not just a storage room or an office. It was Sarah's room. It's preserved exactly as she had left it over 40 years ago. Kate sat down heavily on Rose's bed, still holding the photograph of the little girl in the pink dress, as she thought about all the times she had seen Rose crying after. Standing by that locked door, all the times Rose had touched the key around her neck with such sadness in her eyes. Now she understood that Rose had been visiting her daughter's room, keeping Sarah's memory alive in the only way she knew how. The letter continued with Rose's explanation of why she had kept Sarah's existence a secret. She wrote that talking about Sarah had always been too painful, that she was afraid if she started talking about her daughter, she would never be able to stop crying. She had thought it would be easier to keep Sarah's memory private, to honor her in quiet ways without burdening the rest of the family with her grief. But now, as she grew older, Rose realized that Sarah's story deserved to be told, that love should not be hidden away even when it came with pain. William folded the letter carefully and looked at Kate, had tears running down her cheeks. They both understood now why Rose had guarded that door so carefully, why she had worn the key around her neck like a sacred treasure. The brass key was not just opening a door to a room. It was opening a door to Rose's heart, to the deepest love, and the deepest pain she had ever known. Kay and Rose had finally decided that it was time for them to see what was behind that door. William held the brass key in his palm, feeling its weight and warmth. The key that Rose had carried around her neck for so many years now rested in his hand, and with it came the responsibility of opening a door that had been sealed for over 40 years. Kate stood beside him at the top of the stairs, both of them staring down the hallway toward the room that had been Sarah's. The hallway seemed longer than usual, and each step they took toward the door felt heavy with the knowledge of what they were about to discover. The brass key slid into the lock easily, as if it had been waiting all these years for this moment. William turned it slowly, hearing the soft click of the mechanism releasing. The sound seemed to echo through the quiet house, marking the end of decades of secrets and the beginning of understanding. Kate reached out and placed her hand over William's on the door handle. Together, they pushed the door open and stepped into Sarah's world. The room was like stepping back in time to 1978. Everything was exactly as a 7-year-old girl had left it on what would turn out to be her last day of playing in this space. The bed was made with sheets covered in tiny pink flowers, and a stuffed rabbit sat propped against the pillow, as if waiting for Sarah to return from school. Toys were arranged carefully on shelves along the walls, each one placed with the kind of precision that showed they had been touched and moved, and loved many times over the years since Sarah's death. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating dust particles that danced in the air like tiny spirits. The window faced the garden, and William realized that Sarah would have been able to see her mother working among the roses from this very spot. A small wooden chair sat by the window, and on it was a picture book about a little girl and her pet cat. The book was open to a page with colorful illustrations, and William could imagine Rose sitting here reading to Sarah on quiet afternoons. Kate walked slowly around the room, taking in every detail, and on the dresser sat a jewelry box with a tiny ballerina that still turned when the lid was opened. Next to it were hair ribbons in every color, arranged in a neat row, as if Sarah had just finished deciding which one to wear. A small mirror reflected Kate's face, and for a moment she felt like she was intruding on something sacred and private. But then she remembered Rose's letter, and knew that Rose wanted them to see this, wanted them to understand who Sarah had been. The walls were covered with artwork that Sarah had created. Crayon drawings of flowers and houses and stick figure families were taped up everywhere. Some of the pictures showed 3 people standing in front of a house with a big garden, and William realized these were pictures of Sarah with Rose and his grandfather. In one drawing, Sarah had written her name in shaky letters across the bottom, along with the words, "I love you, Mommy and Daddy," in purple crayon, on the small desk near the window. Kate found Sarah's school supplies. Pencils and crayons were organized in a coffee can that had been covered with decorative paper. Notebook lay open, showing pages of Sarah's handwriting practice. She had been learning to write in cursive, and page after page showed her attempts at making the letters flow together smoothly. At the top of one page, she had written Sarah Rose Mitchell over and over again. Practicing her full name, William picked up a photo album that was sitting on the bedside table. As he turned the pages, he saw the story of Sarah's short life told in pictures. There were photos of her as a baby, then as a toddler taking her first steps in Rose's garden. There were pictures of birthdays and holidays of Sarah helping Rose, baked cookies, of her learning to ride a bicycle with William's grandfather running alongside her. Every photo showed a happy, loved child who was the center of her parents' world in the closet. Kate found Sarah's clothes still hanging on tiny hangers. Dresses and shirts and little sweaters were arranged by color, and on the floor were pairs of small shoes lined up neatly in a row. Everything was clean and well-maintained, showing that Rose had been caring for these belongings for decades, dusting and organizing and preserving every piece of Sarah's life. On the highest shelf in the closet, William found more boxes filled with Sarah's treasures. There were shells she had collected at the beach, rocks with interesting shapes, and a jar full of coins she had been saving. There was also a diary with a small lock, and when William opened it, he found pages filled with a 7-year-old's thoughts about her friends at school, her pets, and her plans for when she grew up. She wanted to be a teacher, like her favorite teacher at school, and she wanted to have a garden just like her mother's. As they explored the room, William and Kate began to understand the depth of Rose's love for Sarah and the magnitude of her loss. Every item in the room had been preserved with care and love. Every toy had been dusted. Every book had been kept in perfect condition. Every piece of clothing had been protected from moths and fading. Rose had turned this room into a shrine to her daughter's memory, a place where Sarah's spirit could live on unchanged by time. Kate found Rose's journal on the writing desk, opened to the last entry Rose had written before her stroke. The pages were filled with letters to Sarah, written as if Sarah could still read them. Rose wrote about the changing seasons, about the flowers in the garden, about William's visits, and about how proud she was of the man he had become. She wrote about missing Sarah every day, about wishing she could have watched her daughter grow up, about all the conversations they would never have and all the milestones they would never share. The final entry in the journal was dated just 2 days before Rose's stroke. In it, Rose wrote that she was finally ready to share Sarah's story with William and Kate. She wrote that she had carried this secret for too long, and that it was time for Sarah's memory to be celebrated rather than hidden away. She wrote that love was meant to be shared even when it came with pain, and that she hoped William would understand why she had kept this part of her life private for so many years. William and Kate sat on the small bed in Sarah's room as the afternoon sun began to fade. They had spent hours going through every corner of the room, reading Rose's journal entries, and looking at photographs that told the story of a little girl who had been deeply loved. The weight of what they had discovered was overwhelming. For over 40 years, Rose had been living with this enormous grief, visiting this room every day, keeping Sarah's memory alive in complete silence. Kate held one of Sarah's drawings in her hands, a picture of 3 stick figures standing in front of a house with a big yellow sun overhead. The little girl had written "My family" at the top in crooked letters, and at the bottom she had signed it "Love, Sarah." Kate thought about how Rose must have looked at this drawing thousands of times over the years, how it must have brought her both comfort and pain to see her daughter's artwork every single day. William was reading through more of Rose's journal entries, and with each page he turned, he understood more about what his grandmother had been going through. Rose had written to Sarah almost every day for decades, telling her about the weather, about the flowers in the garden, about William's visits and his accomplishments. She wrote about missing Sarah's voice, about wondering what kind of woman Sarah would have become, about all the conversations they would never have. In one entry from 5 years ago, Rose had written about William's college graduation. She told Sarah how proud she was of William, but also how sad she felt that Sarah would never get to experience graduating from school herself. She wrote about how she had saved a piece of graduation cake and brought it to Sarah's room, sitting by the window and pretending that Sarah was there to celebrate with them. Kate felt tears running down her cheeks as she imagined Rose sitting alone in this room, sharing important family moments with a daughter who existed only in her memories. Another entry described the day William had first brought Kate to meet Rose. Rose had written to Sarah about how much she liked Kate, about how Kate reminded her of Sarah in some ways because of her kindness and her love for flowers. Rose had written that she wished Sarah could have met Kate, that she thought that 2 of them would have been great friends. Kate realized that Rose's immediate acceptance of her had been partly because she saw something of Sarah in her. As they continued reading, William and Kate found entries that showed how Rose's grief had changed over the years. In the early entries, from the 1980s, Rose's writing was full of raw pain and anger. She wrote about how unfair it was that Sarah had been taken away so young, about how empty the house felt without her daughter's laughter, about how hard it was to get through each day. But as the years passed, Rose's entries became more peaceful, more focused on celebrating Sarah's memory rather than mourning her loss. In recent entries, Rose had begun to write about feeling ready to share Sarah's story with others. She wrote about being tired of carrying this secret alone, about wanting William to know that he had once had an aunt who would have loved him very much. She wrote about hoping that someday Sarah's room could be a place of love and remembrance rather than just a private shrine to grief. The last entry in the journal was the most powerful of all. Rose had written it just 1 day before her stroke, and in it she talked about finally having the courage to tell William and Kate about Sarah. She wrote that she had realized that love was meant to be shared, that keeping Sarah's memory locked away was not honoring her daughter's life but hiding it. She wrote that she wanted Sarah's story to be told, wanted her daughter to be remembered by more people than just herself. William closed the journal and looked around the room one more time. Every toy, every book, every piece of clothing told the story of a child who had been cherished beyond measure. But more than that, everything in this room told the story of a mother's love that had lasted for over 40 years. A love so strong that it had kept Sarah's memory alive in perfect detail all this time. Kate stood up and walked to the window. Looking out at Rose's garden, where the autumn flowers were still blooming despite the cold weather, she thought about all the times she had worked in that garden with Rose, not knowing that Rose was tending flowers that held memories of Sarah. Every rose bush, every carefully planted flower bed was part of Rose's way of staying connected to her daughter. As the sun set completely and the room grew dark, William and Kate finally understood the full depth of what Rose had been carrying all these years. They understood why she had been so secretive about the locked door, why she had sometimes seemed sad for no apparent reason, why she had been so careful about who she let into her life. Rose had been protecting not just Sarah's memory, but her own heart, which had been broken so completely that it had taken decades to even begin healing. When they finally left Sarah's room and closed the door behind them, Liam and Kate felt like they were different people than they had been when they opened it. They had discovered not just a room full of a little girl's belongings, but a story of love that was deeper and more lasting than anything they had ever imagined. They had learned that Rose was not just William's grandmother, but a woman who had survived the worst loss any parent could experience, and had found a way to keep living and loving despite that loss. The next morning, they drove to the hospital with hearts full of new understanding and new respect for Rose. They sat beside her bed and told her quietly that they had found Sarah's room, that they had read her journal, that they understood now why she had kept this secret for so long. Even though Rose was still unconscious, they felt like she could hear them. They told her that Sarah's memory was safe with them, that her daughter's story would be told with love and respect, and that Rose would never have to carry this grief alone again. Kate held Rose's hand and whispered that Sarah would have been proud of the mother who had loved her so completely, who had kept her memory alive with such dedication and care. And for just a moment, they thought they saw Rose's fingers squeeze back, as if she finally felt the peace that comes from sharing a burden that had been carried alone for far too long.